want to talk for a second about race and IQ. This is a conversation that has been absolutely radioactive in the last 25 years, more than 25 years, since the bell curve came out in 1994. Um, Charles Murray and his co-author died before the book went to publish, but Charles Murray has been treated terribly in the intervening years. He's been raked over the coals and back again, smeared as a racist and a Nazi and every pejorative under the sun. He was attacked recently, fairly recently, a couple of years ago, at Middlebury High School, I think it was, or university. His chaperone was assaulted as well, and it's all over one chapter in this book. The book was about IQ. Um, it was a 700-page lamentation about the stratification of society, where people with high IQs would silo themselves off from the rest of us. We can see that in places like Silicon Valley, for instance. Um, so the chapter on race implied that the racial differences, the IQ differences rather, between races is very likely to be part genetic. I think that's a safe assumption to make about nearly anything. I mean, practically everything we are is a mixture of nature and nurture. But this has been too much for the leftists to take. The idea that there could be differences between the races in intelligence is too much, and I quite frankly don't like this data either. I think it would be better if everyone was the same, or blank slates even. But I what I want more than anything else is honesty, and I don't think people should be smeared as a bigot just because they look at the science with integrity. And the people that do look at it with integrity and are not encumbered by political correctness are absolutely smeared and as I say, raked over the coals. Um, what the leftists did initially was to try and discredit the IQ test. And IQ, it just can't be discredited. I mean, it's very reliable. It's predictable. It can make predictions. It's heritable. I think it has a correlation of about zero point 0.6. If you want anything for your child, you should want, well, first of all, you should want them to be an optimist. You should want them to have a high IQ and be conscientious. Um, Conscientious is one of the big five personality traits, um, and whatever they do, they're very likely to be a success in life. So when they couldn't come after the IQ test itself, they promulgated the tabula rasa. That's the blank slate. Um, John Locke came up with the tabula rasa in the 1700s, but the blank slate has been debunked since the 1970s. The whole field of what was sociobiology, what is now evolutionary psychology, is predicated on the fact that there is no blank slate, that we're not born infinitely malleable beings. We have a lot of there's a lot on the hardware when we are born. Um, so when the tabula rasa hypothesis fell through, they attack the man some more and do what the Guardian do. They call it race science. Instead of just being science that they don't like, they will call it race science to somehow discredit it. I'm not mad about this data either, but I'm certainly not going to lie about it or smear anybody as a bigot just because they pay attention to it. So when you look at society, you see that it maps on perfectly with the IQ spectrum. So the most successful in society are the Jews, the East Asians, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Koreans. They do the best, and they're top of the IQ distribution. Then you have white people, then you have like Latinos, then American blacks, and African blacks, and down to Australian Aborigines and the Native Americans and that kind of thing. There's a tremendous amount of overlap, though. I mean, it doesn't mean a black African can't become a nuclear physicist and have an IQ of 140. Of course they could. These are all averages. You can never make an assumption about an individual. And I just have to say, no matter what the data is, we should all be treated fairly, and nobody should be treated any different because of their skin color or their IQ. We should all be treated equally. But I think lying about this data is a big mistake. I think an honest conversation needs to be had about it. And Charles Murray, I've read some of his other books as well. Very recently, Human Diversity is an excellent book, and I read a book a few years ago called Coming Apart. So just to write him out of the conversation because you don't like the data that he's promulgating, try and refute it with an argument. I always have a bias towards people who need to attack somebody with ad hominem attacks, smearing him as, a racist or this or that. It seems to me that if they could refute his data with evidence, with better science, then they would do it. They don't do that because they haven't got any evidence to refute it. So what's the only recourse they have? It's to attack him with ad hominems. Well, it should be obvious who is on the side, who is more closer to being on the side of truth here. And it's not the leftists.